Gunsmoke and Heartache, Book 1, Part 1 of the trilogy, a Western romance novella. Written by Lila Dawson.
Chapter 11. Tom Rowland. I wasn't sure what compelled me to agree to this. Lying came as naturally to me as breathing. I'd been lying for the last few years, sure, but it didn't start there. Even when I was a kid, I lied for myself, lied for other people, and lied just to see if people would believe me. I guess I got so good at it that it became easier and easier to convince people that what I said was true. And yet, part of what came with that was having a good eye for the truth. I could smell a lie a mile away. I was good at picking up on even the little ones, but today I realized that the first time I ever saw Tabitha Henry tell a lie was when I asked her to. I couldn't bring myself to lie to her, so I did something I almost never did. I took a deep breath, and then I told the truth. I don't have many stories about my parents that aren't made up. I talk about my mother sometimes, but the truth is I never met the woman, and she wasn't mentioned a single time by my father. The one time I asked, he beat me so badly he knocked a tooth out. Thankfully, it was a baby tooth, I said, chuckling. I quickly hardened my expression. I'd long realized that I had a bad habit of laughing when I heard something awful, and it was worst when it involved me. It isn't funny, you know, but I understand why you laugh. It's all right if you want to laugh, if it makes it easier to tell your story, she said, much to my surprise. It was surprisingly wise coming from a 21-year-old. Well, that makes it a lot easier. Thank you. So I stopped asking my father about my mother. I figure either she did something bad to him that he didn't want to talk about, or he did something bad to her that he didn't want to talk about. Probably both. My sister, well, she's made up. I never had a sister, thank God. The only woman I had in my life was a teacher who invited me over to eat with her, and it turned out she didn't know how to keep her hands to herself when alone around young boys. I didn't know any better, so I thought I was lucky. In a strange way, it was the first thing even close to love anyone had ever shown me. I stopped speaking when I saw Tabitha wiping at her face. A sniff confirmed what I suspected. Please do me a favor, Mr. Rowland, and continue your story. I don't cry from my ears, so I can still listen. I laughed. Perhaps inappropriately, perhaps not. I didn't exactly know. Though this was possibly the easiest conversation I'd ever had, given the challenging topic. I quickly moved on from the teacher. I'd long since stopped considering myself lucky to have known her. I didn't leave home voluntarily to find my way in the world, I said. When I was a young man, a little younger than you, my father got into a fight with some outlaws passing through over something so stupid I can't even recall what it was. He was drunk and kept threatening one of their boys. Finally, he made the foolish mistake of moving past threats and reaching for his pistol. Was shot dead before it cleared leather. The leader was so impressed by my lack of emotion at seeing my father gunned down that he asked if I'd like to join them and earn some good money. So, that's what I did. Do you have a big fortune stashed away somewhere? She asked. That's the thing about outlaws, Ms. Henry. They lie. Never trust a thing one of them tells you. Does that also apply to you? Especially me, I said. What happened after you joined up with those outlaws? She asked. The question I was afraid she'd ask. I reckon that's enough story time about myself for today. For obvious reasons, I'd appreciate it if all this stayed between the two of us. Sorry you had to meet such an awful teacher, Mr. Rowland. A teacher can really affect a child quite a lot, for good and for bad. I grunted, considering my reply. I appreciated her words, but was already feeling worn out from the conversation and reliving the memories. In the end, I really couldn't think of any reply at all, so I simply changed the subject. Why not become a teacher yourself? Does it really matter that much if your family likes it?" She stared blankly ahead for a moment, as if surprised by the question. "Yes, of course it matters. My father would personally see to it no one would hire me." "Not if you travel far enough," I said. "Besides, are you sure he'd try to stop you? Sounds like they sent you here to get you out of their hair. Maybe they've written you off as a lost cause and won't even care anymore." She laughed at that, shaking her head. "Oh, how I wish that were the case, but you don't know my father, or my mother, for that matter. They're used to getting their way, and the world makes it so they are never disappointed. Everything's always more complicated when dealing with rich and powerful people, Mr. Rowland." I tipped my hat, smiling. "Well then, I suppose I should consider myself lucky my life isn't burdened by such complications." "Indeed. And I'm surprised by your response. Most men I've spoken to immediately tell me what a fool I am for not happily accepting my place as the wife of some wealthy man and bearing children." "Well, I'll not call you a fool, but there's certainly nothing wrong with being a proud mother. Not so different from being a teacher, either." She nodded, not nearly as upset by the statement as I'd expected her to be. Had I said this a month ago, she'd probably have bitten my head off. I suppose all you have to do to make a young woman act reasonably is save her life. "That's well reasoned. Perhaps if I could choose a husband, that's something I'd consider. A man chosen by my father will be like my father, and that is not a man I wish to marry. Being a teacher always felt like my calling in life, like it was what God called on me to do, or at least, that's how it used to feel. Have you ever felt that way about something?" I scratched my chin. More uncomfortable questions, and as much as I'd warmed up to the girl, I was already growing weary of them. "Seems to me that God makes a man a certain way, then drops him into the world to make his own way. Besides, I doubt God speaks to men like me. I reckon my life's been touched more by the hand of the devil. You'll never be able to forgive yourself until you stop seeing yourself as a wicked man." "I am a wicked man," I said, a bit colder than I'd meant to. "You don't act like a wicked man. You've not been wicked to me," she said. My mind wandered to places I lacked the strength to go right now, and I found my jaw pulling tight. She'd never say such a thing if she knew me, knew the things I'd done. "You'd best be heading back in. We'll be changing the watch soon, so I'll be turning in soon myself." She frowned but made no argument, then excused herself politely. "Of course, you give a girl like this an inch, she takes a mile." I hoped I hadn't made a mistake telling her as much as I did.
Chapter 12. Tabitha Henry, 6 weeks later. More than a month had passed since that awful day in the cornfield, and I was starting to have trouble recognizing myself in the mirror. It was hard to believe that I ever looked down on these people, or thought I was above this way of life. I still dreamed of becoming a teacher, but was beginning to truly appreciate the life some women chose that I had previously thought demeaning. Raising children, taking care of the home, simple things like cooking all seemed to take on a deeper meaning for me. Cooking, which had once been a novel curiosity, had become a joy. There was something to be said about the smiles a good meal created. If a man could sit down to delicious food after a long day of hard work, it was as if it made all his stress and worry disappear, or, at the very least, lightened the load. Good food wasn't just about nutrition and staying alive. It was a means to make people happy. All people. "You sure you're not lying for Tabitha about these biscuits, Mrs. Henry?" Tom asked. "Mr. Rowland, it would suit you better to give compliments directly." "I reckon it would literally kill the man to be nice to any woman other than you, Mrs. Henry. He's just trying to stay alive," Terrence said, laughing and nearly losing the food in his mouth. "Swallow your food before you talk. "We might be men, but we ain't animals," Buster said. "You're spitting biscuit on half the table." "Some of us may as well be animals," Tom said, laughing as he slapped a red-faced Terrence on the back. "If you boys don't hurry and finish breakfast, I'm going to take it out of your pay," Mr. Henry said. No one wanted to take a chance on whether he was serious. Everyone was eating noticeably faster. Suddenly, one of the hands burst in, nearly falling as he came through the door. "Billy's hurt, fell into a nail sticking out of a fence and ripped his arm open something awful." I was the first to stand up and make my way to the door, hurrying out onto the porch where a bleeding Billy sat, holding the bloody shirt he'd removed over his wound. Billy Whitley was the same man who'd taken me to help with the birthing cow when I first arrived, and he hadn't been particularly kind at the time. I was later told he was quite good with livestock and had done some studying to become a vet, only to give up partway through. He charged much less than the local vet and was good at handling most things. "Show me," I insisted, urging him to peel back the shirt. After some hesitation, he pulled back the bloody cloth to reveal a thick flap of skin hanging in a way it ought not to be. Tom stepped out, holding a bottle of whiskey, and Aunt Jane followed closely behind with our little kit for sewing up wounds like these, which weren't especially rare on the ranch. Tom looked far more entertained than concerned. "Nice little scratch you've got there, Bill," he said. "Must have ticked off one of the barn cats." I took the bottle from Tom's hand and poured it over the wound, prompting a pained growl from Billy. "Don't you have work to not be doing, Tom?" Billy snapped. Tom laughed. "Careful. With him growling and slobbering like that, he might have rabies too." "For heaven's sake, Tom," Aunt Jane said, herding him off the porch. "Give the man some peace." "Do you need something to bite down on, Mr. Whitley?" I asked, trying to be as gentle as possible. "No, ma'am, I'll be fine if you don't tarry." I nodded, making haste with my needle and thread. Despite his confident statement, he winced and jerked with each piercing of the needle. Not that I could blame him for that, of course. I did my best to ignore his reactions, as he'd asked, and continued the work at a steady pace. By the time I was halfway done, I'd already started sweating, though at least my hands were still steady. "This should just about do it," I said. He looked down at the wound, then back up at me. "I know I said to hurry, but you can finish the job at least." There was a very respected battlefield surgeon who found that leaving wounds open when possible, or at least partway open, led to less risk of infection and subsequent amputation. "Amputation?" he asked, his voice noticeably higher. "Right, the thing we don't want to happen. You're a tough one, Mr. Whitley, but tougher men than you have lost their arms and legs," I said, trying to be understanding but also firm. If I wasn't firm, he'd argue. Aunt Jane had told me that the best way to argue with a man was to not give him the opportunity. "You got a twin sister?" he asked. "No. Why would you ask me that?" "Well, whoever you are, you ain't the same girl that showed up here a few months ago. That's for sure." "I'll take that as a compliment, Mr. Whitley," I said, wrapping his wound in clean linens. "Please make sure you go at your earliest convenience and have the doctor take a look at it." "Why? You already took care of it." "Because I'm not a doctor." "I'm not a vet," he said. "Mr. Whitley," I said, lowering my voice just the way I'd seen Aunt Jane do it. "All right, ma'am, I'll do as you ask. I need to check on a few more of the livestock, and I'll head that way." I nodded. Tom waved from a short distance away. "Hey, Bill. Buster said you could keep that whiskey as a souvenir to commemorate your first big war wound on the ranch." "That's not exactly the way I worded it, Tom," Buster said, shaking his head. "But yes, Mr. Henry said you were welcome to take it as compensation. It's a good bottle." Billy looked down at the label, raising his eyebrows and nodding. "No kidding." Without another word, he stood up and left. Part of me wondered where my whiskey bottle reward was. Not that I'd want such a thing. Nice job, Tabitha. Got our soldier patched up and back in action. Saved the man's life, I reckon. I've done more work than you have so far today, Tom, I said, smiling. More like this week, Buster corrected. And you're acting awfully familiar, Tom. Tabitha, huh? Not Miss Henry? Tom's face immediately reddened. Apologies, Miss Henry, he said, tipping his hat. I prefer Tabitha, actually. I'd like it if you keep calling me that. Tom didn't answer, still red-faced as he and Buster walked away. Aunt Jane put an arm around my shoulder and gave me a quick hug. That was very good work. Let's get you cleaned up, she said, walking with me to the wash basin outside. We'll have to get you a replacement dress. That's all right, Aunt Jane. I have dozens of them at home. But you said you liked the ones you wear here more than those you had at home. That was true. She'd remembered. That's very kind of you and Uncle, I said, trying not to become emotional. I do like them better.
Chapter 13. Tom Rowland. I was hauling feed sacks to the barn when I spotted 3 riders approaching from the north. My hand instinctively moved toward my belt before I realized I didn't have a pistol on me, though I recognized the lead rider before any real alarm set in. Carter Richardson. The old man from the fence dispute months back. His 2 sons flanked him, and all 3 had their hands visible and empty, even though they wore guns on their hips. Still, I kept my distance as they rode up to the front of the house. Mr. Henry emerged from the porch, and I found myself drifting closer to hear what they had to say. "Afternoon, Mr. Henry," Carter called out, dismounting slowly. His sons followed suit, both looking uncomfortable. "We have not been formally introduced. I'm your new neighbor who moved in a few months back. Hope we're not intruding." "Not at all, and you must be Mr. Richardson. What brings you by?" The old man cleared his throat, glancing around until his eyes found me. "Actually, we ought to speak about your man Tom there first, if that's all right." All eyes turned to me, and I felt my stomach tighten. Nothing good ever came from being singled out by a crowd. "Tom," Mr. Henry called. "Come on over." I set down the feed sack I'd been carrying and walked over, trying to read the expressions on the Richardson faces. They didn't look angry or threatening, which was something. "Mr. Rowland," Carter said, extending his hand. "I wanted to thank you properly for how you handled that business with the fence a few months back." I shook his hand, admittedly a bit confused. "No need for thanks. We sorted it out." "That's the thing, it could have gone a lot worse if you hadn't kept your head." He gestured to his sons. "Anthony here was ready to start shooting over a few feet of fence line. Might have gotten someone killed over nothing." Anthony Richardson stepped forward, hat in his hands. "I wanted to apologize, Mr. Rowland, for pulling on you like that. Wasn't right, and it sure wasn't smart." "Water under the bridge," I said, though I could still feel an ache in my leg from time to time. "We brought you something," Carter said, nodding to his younger son, who produced a burlap sack from his saddlebag. "Best sausage you'll find in 3 counties. My wife's recipe. Don't get any fresher, either." The smell hit me before I even took the sack. It was rich, smoky, seasoned with herbs I recognized but couldn't name. My mouth watered a bit involuntarily. "That's very kind of you," I said. "But really, there's no need—" "Nonsense," Carter interrupted. "This is for everyone here on the ranch. Besides, we're hoping to be better neighbors going forward. Maybe trade some goods from time to time. Help each other out during harvest. Nothing worse out here than a bad neighbor." Mr. Henry stepped up, clearly pleased with this development. "That sounds like a fine arrangement, Mr. Richardson. Why don't you and your boys come inside? My wife just put on fresh coffee." As the men headed toward the house, Mrs. Henry appeared on the porch, having obviously been listening from inside. "Tom, that sausage smells wonderful," she said. "You know, I was just thinking we needed something special for lunch today. Didn't you mention once that you used to make some kind of sausage dish when you went hunting?" I had mentioned that, though the truth was more complicated. The hunting trips had been times when our gang holed up in the wilderness, living off whatever we could catch or steal. I'd gotten good at making meals from scraps, sausage, eggs, and whatever vegetables we could forage or liberate from nearby farms. "I might remember a thing or two," I said, smiling. "Nothing close to what you make regularly." "Perfect." Mrs. Henry clapped her hands together. "Tabitha's been wanting to learn more cooking techniques, and a camp lunch has its own charm. Why don't you two work on lunch while the rest of us get acquainted with our neighbors?" My stomach dropped. The last thing I needed was to be alone in a kitchen with Tabitha, especially after the way she'd been acting lately. Ever since the incident in the cornfield, she'd been different. Friendlier, more attentive. It was making me nervous. "I'm sure Miss Henry has other things," I started, though a familiar voice cut me off. "Actually, I'd love to learn," Tabitha interrupted, appearing beside her aunt with that bright smile that had been showing up more and more often lately. I never expected Tom to be hiding recipes in that hard head of his. Mrs. Henry was already ushering the Richardson men inside, leaving me standing there with the sack of sausage and a young woman who seemed genuinely excited about spending time with me. Exactly what I'd been trying to avoid. "Well," I said reluctantly, "I suppose we could put something together." 20 minutes later, I found myself in the Henry kitchen, sleeves rolled up, trying to pretend this was a normal situation. Tabitha stood beside me at the large wooden table, watching intently as I sliced the potatoes and dumped them into the greased skillet. "You're very good with that knife," she observed. Maybe a bit too good, and unfortunately my experience rarely involved kitchen work. "Just takes practice." I'd already sent her to gather eggs from the henhouse and collect some wild onions from the garden, hoping to be free of her for a bit. However, it barely felt like she was gone a minute. Now she was back, standing closer than was strictly necessary, and I was acutely aware of her presence. "So what exactly are we making?" she asked. "Something my friends and I used to call a campfire scramble. Nothing fancy, but it fills you up." I added the sausage pieces. The sound of sizzling filled the kitchen, along with that rich, smoky aroma. "Your friends eat things like that often?" If only she knew. Most of the time, dirt would have been an improvement. We made do with what we had. As the sausage cooked, I found myself falling into the familiar rhythm of the work. It had been years since I'd cooked anything more complicated than coffee over a campfire. This felt relaxing, comfortable in a way that made me deeply uncomfortable. "Should I crack the eggs now?" Tabitha asked, moving to stand beside me at the stove. "Not yet. Let the sausage get a good sear first." I stirred the meat and potatoes, trying to ignore how her sleeve brushed against my arm. Didn't she understand the concept of personal space? "Onions next." She added the diced onions to the pan, and she made a point of leaning far closer than necessary. My face was starting to burn in a way that had nothing to do with cooking. "Like this?" She stared up at me with those blue eyes and smiled. I had to step back. "That's fine," I said, my voice rougher than I meant for it to be. I realized she was still looking at me, but worse, I realized the effect it was having. "Tom," she said softly, "I wanted to thank you again for everything you've done for me since I've been here." "No need," I said quickly, turning back to the stove. "Any other man would have done the same." "No, they wouldn't have. I've known plenty of other men." Her voice was quiet but certain. "You've been very kind to me." There was that word again. Kind. I'd rather be called every foul name that would make a preacher turn away than to be called kind. "No, ma'am," I said, stirring the sausage and onions more vigorously than necessary. "I've barely been civil." "That's not true." She moved closer again, and this time I couldn't step far enough away to still be in reach to stir the skillet. "You encouraged me to stand up to my father. You've been patient with my questions. You saved my life, but not just in the obvious way." "I did what anyone would do." "You did what a good man would do, if that's what you mean." I put down the wooden spoon and turned to face her, needing to put an end to this before it went any further. "Tabitha, you don't know me. You don't know the things I've done, the kind of man I really am. If you did—" "Then tell me," she interrupted, stepping even closer. "I've told you about my past, my family. You've already told me part of yours. I'm not bothered by it, Tom." Because if she knew the truth, she'd slap me and storm out of this kitchen. For good reason. "You're prying too much. Some things are better left alone," I said instead. "Are they? Or are you just afraid?" The question hit too close to home, and I felt my temper flare. "Afraid of what?" "Of letting someone care about you." It wasn't exactly what I'd expected her to say. The words hung in the air between us like smoke from the skillet. I stared at her, knowing I had to change the subject or risk saying or doing something I'd regret. "The eggs," I said abruptly, turning back to the stove. "We need to add the eggs now." She handed me the bowl of beaten eggs. I poured them into the hot pan, watching them begin to set around the edges. "Tom, let's just finish cooking for now," I said, not looking at her. "I ain't got the patience for all this conversation, and everyone's going to be hungry once the smell of this starts flooding the house." We worked in silence after that, but I could feel her watching me, could sense her frustration building. She was acting like a brat again. When the dish was finished, golden eggs mixed with browned sausage and potatoes, I started to carry it to the dining room. "Tom, wait," she said, catching my arm. I stopped, looking down at her hand on my sleeve. Such a small hand, but it felt like the strength of an ox holding me in place. "Why are you so determined to push me away?" she asked quietly. For a moment, I considered telling her more, enough to make her understand that her attentions were more deserved elsewhere, anywhere. But then I heard Mr. Henry's voice from the dining room, calling for lunch, and the spell was broken. "Because it's better this way," I said, gently pulling my arm free. "You're not going to be a teacher if you let yourself get mixed up with a man, especially a man like me." I expected this to snap her back to reality, but the look on her face told me I'd given her more insult than I'd meant.
Chapter 14. Tabitha Henry. I was in the kitchen helping Aunt Jane with lunch when I saw riders approaching through the kitchen window. 3, all dressed in clothing far too nice for ranch work. My stomach dropped when the man in the lead came into view. My father. Aunt Jane peeked over my shoulder, offering me a smile I wasn't sure was genuine. "Go and let your uncle know his brother is here," she said. After a bit of searching I wished would last longer, I found my uncle in the barn. Considering the look on his face, he might have been the one person less pleased with the visit than I was. We both walked back to the house in complete silence. Not that words were necessary. My uncle had known him longer than I did, after all. Noticing the two of us approach, my father dismounted his horse. His clothing was nearly immaculate, despite the journey. He didn't know the meaning of modesty. He wore a dark suit that likely cost more than a month's salary for a ranch hand. His hair was styled, even along the edges of his clean hat. He gazed out over the ranch, as if assessing its value. "Robert," Marcus said, extending his hand, "this is an unexpected surprise. We'd have prepared better if we had known you were coming." "Marcus," Father said, shaking his hand briefly, "I hope you don't mind. I'd planned to visit a little later, but business took me to the area today. Figured now was as good a time as any to check on my daughter's progress." His eyes met mine, and I found myself becoming tense, as I always did. "You look better than I expected, Tabitha. Seems you've adjusted quite well to the simple life." "Thank you," I said. Words I didn't mean. Aunt Jane walked out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm sure you're tired from the ride here, Robert. You and your companions are welcome to come have a seat at the table. I'll put on some fresh coffee." Father nodded to the two men still on their horses, and they remained where they were without dismounting. "That's all right. I don't plan to stay for very long. By the time they water our horses, I'll nearly be done. I'll just come in and speak to my family. I do hope my daughter hasn't been much trouble for you. I expect she wasn't an easy student." "Tabitha wasn't any trouble at all," Aunt Jane replied, her voice warm. "She's been a lot of help around here, as a matter of fact. Everyone's grown fond of having her around." Father snorted, clearly skeptical of Aunt Jane's words. "Well, I'm glad to hear that. I was hoping she'd learn a thing or two from you. You know, her place as a woman. Learning to be a proper wife will serve Tabitha well in her new life." "New life?" I asked. Despite my best efforts, the words came out quiet and strained. "Let's talk inside," Uncle Marcus said, motioning for us to follow. He held up a hand to Tom and Buster, who were also about to head inside. "Wait out here for a few minutes, gentlemen. We've got a bit of a family meeting going on." Tom and Buster both nodded, but looked concerned. Father looked Buster up and down like he was a strange horse and seemed to be holding back a laugh. The four of us went inside and sat at the table. Aunt Jane was away briefly before returning with coffee for everyone. I sat rigid in my chair, like it was the most uncomfortable piece of furniture ever crafted. Once he felt confident he had everyone's attention, Father began speaking. "As you all know, Tabitha is 21. And, it goes without saying, a beautiful woman of marriageable age. As her father, I've taken it upon myself to search for a suitable husband for her. Something I thought might take time, given her unruly behavior." "Robert, look." "Let me finish, Marcus. I've been in touch with a prominent businessman named Frederick Bell. He's a man in his 40s and has unfortunately had to lay 2 wives to rest already, without a single child between the two. One died in childbirth, along with their son. Mr. Bell is no ordinary businessman. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you've heard of him. He owns the largest lumber operation west of the Mississippi." Suddenly, I felt a chill all the way to my bones. I'd heard Father speak of this man before. He was always frustrated that he couldn't get the man's attention in order to conduct business. Now, he'd found a way to get his attention. "Father," I said, so quietly he didn't even hear me. "Mr. Bell has graciously expressed interest in marrying Tabitha," Father said, his voice swelling with pride. "The union also carries the added benefit of opening our families up to conducting business together. A mine goes through a lot of lumber, as I'm sure you remember, Robert. Of course, a ranch goes through a bit of lumber, and I'd be happy to allow you to benefit from this arrangement as well." Father looked to everyone. It was clear he'd expected praise, or perhaps some kind of round of applause for his efforts. I took a deep breath and found my voice. "Father, you can't be serious." "Don't be ungrateful, Tabitha. I thought you'd learned something. Of course I'm serious. Do you think I'd come all the way here to make some kind of joke? I don't want to marry Frederick Bell. I've never heard you say a kind word about the man in your life, I said, standing to my feet, sending my chair sliding back a few inches behind me. That's too bad. The wedding takes place in 6 weeks. I suggest you get used to the idea. Now sit down. You're not a child anymore, and I expect your behavior to reflect that. No, I won't sit down. This union doesn't carry the added benefit of anything. It's entirely for your benefit to broker a business arrangement. That's enough, he growled, slamming his fist down on the table. You'll not speak to me that way, and you'll not speak ill of your betrothed. I've not agreed to marry him. Aunt Jane spoke up, surprising all of us. Tabitha should at least have some say in the matter, Robert. Before Father could reply, Marcus held up his hands. Robert, maybe you and I should speak alone for a moment. No, I'm fine here. I'll say what I have to say in front of everyone. I don't need either of you lecturing me about my own daughter. Now I see she's somehow gotten even worse. You've clearly just been letting her run wild on this ranch. Aunt Jane spoke again, despite Marcus's subtle shake of his head, a silent plea for her not to say more. We've only encouraged her to start behaving like an adult, just as you asked us to. A woman can think for herself. Surely you and even Mr. Bell would appreciate that. Not when thinking for herself interferes with her family duties. Forgive me, Jane, but maybe you're not the best person to advise Tabitha on how to prepare for the role of giving a man children, considering you lack the ability yourself. Aunt Jane looked genuinely wounded by my father's words. In fact, I'd never seen her look so hurt. Uncle Marcus planted both hands on the table in front of him and slowly stood to his feet. His face had reddened in an instant, and his hand was trembling as he pointed at his brother. What did you just say? Say it again. Say what you just said again. Father scoffed, clearly not concerned. It should be clear to both of us that your wife has lost her senses and has taken on the role of Tabitha's mother in her own mind. Not that I blame her, given her circumstances. Marcus swallowed hard and seemed to be fighting with everything in him to remain calm. Take it back, right now. Apologize to my wife. Marcus, I just meant... I don't care what you meant. Father's laugh was enough to make Uncle Marcus snap. He lunged across the table. Father tried to slide back out of the way, but didn't move in time. Uncle Marcus's fist connected with Father's nose so hard the chair tipped back and he spilled to the floor. Marcus! Aunt Jane shrieked. When her voice didn't reach him, she shouted for anyone who could hear her to help. Decades I've listened to your mouth, Marcus said, already flinging himself over the table and climbing on top of his brother. He slammed his fist into his face several more times. You don't care about nobody but yourself. He drew his fist back again, but Tom and Buster stormed into the house, grabbing him and pulling him off Robert after a brief struggle. Father pulled himself to his feet, leaning against the wall with blood pouring between his fingers. Let go of me, Marcus growled, dragging Tom and Buster a few feet before they regained control of him. I ain't done. Get a hold of yourself, Mr. Henry, Buster pleaded. I looked to Tom's expression and was surprised to see he appeared quite entertained by the whole ordeal. You're going to regret this, Marcus, Father said, making his way to the door. Clearly these cows and horses aren't the only animals here. You're no brother of mine. Get off my land and don't ever let me see your face here again, Marcus shouted, still pulling against the two men holding him back. Don't worry, I don't ever plan on coming back. I've always known I couldn't count on you to behave like an actual Henry. Father always knew you were a disappointment just as well as I did. This kind of life is all you're suited for. He turned to me. Tabitha, don't think this means you get to weasel out of your obligations. The promise has already been made to Mr. Bell, and he will be far more difficult to dissuade than me. I don't suggest treating him as you've treated me. Father, please." He didn't answer me or even look back as he walked out, dripping blood all over the floor and porch as he did. After a brief conversation with his men, they all mounted their horses and rode away. Only then did Tom and Buster release my uncle. He immediately walked over to his wife and embraced her. "Dear, you—" "Don't even start, Jane," he said. "I don't care if it's my brother, the sheriff, or the governor himself. Nobody's going to come in my house and disrespect my wife." She smiled, wiping away a tear on her cheek. "I was only going to say that perhaps you were wrong for hitting him, but I'm still glad you did. I've always despised that man." "I'm glad you hit him too," Tom said, unprompted. "Buster and I heard that punch connect all the way out on the porch. Didn't know you were a pugilist, Mr. Henry." Aunt Jane laughed, then cleared her throat. "Go on now. Tabitha and I need to clean up this mess before lunch. Don't want the men tracking all this around the house." Everyone seemed to be in better spirits, except for me. I found it impossible to smile or laugh about anything. I knew my father, and I knew this was far from over.
Chapter 15. Tom Rowland. As entertained as I'd been seeing Mr. Henry slug his brother, especially after the way he and Tabitha had described the man, I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow I'd been responsible for it. After all, it wasn't Mrs. Henry who put those ideas in her head about standing up to her father and doing her own thing. It was me. I could already smell the consequences coming, and I could see the anxiety building in Tabitha, too. I'd run my mouth when I should have kept to myself. We shared stories, but I didn't know a thing about wealthy families and their dynamics. For all intents and purposes, I was exactly the sort of wild animal Robert Henry probably saw me as. I'd been nothing but trouble my entire life, and I'd brought the same to everyone else, especially women. "Bring us another post over here, Tom." I'll never forget that look in Claudia's eyes. Never. Not in a single waking moment, and not in the nightmares I'd had ever since. Ever since. "Hey, Tom, you get mud in your ears?" Buster asked. I shook my head, finally coming back to reality. "Sorry, Buster. What did you say?" "Why don't we take a little walk?" he said, nodding to the other men to continue their work. I cursed myself for letting my distress show enough for Buster to notice, though Buster noticed just about everything. Once we'd gotten out of earshot of the others, he didn't waste time prying. "All right, Tom. Let's hear it. What's got you so distracted? I've known you for years, and you've never acted like this before." "Don't suppose I could keep it to myself?" I asked with a grin, hoping maybe he'd let it go and I could just put more effort into keeping it hidden. "Out here, a distracted man leads to a dead man if we're not careful. It can stay between me and you if that's what you want. Though I'm sure Mr. Henry would be glad to help if you're in some kind of trouble. You in trouble, Tom?" I sighed, shaking my head. Buster's kindness had disarmed me from going to my usual antics. That night after Tabitha got attacked in the field, she sat with me on the porch while I was doing my watch. Stupid as I am, I talked to her like she was one of us. I put all kinds of nonsense in her head about standing up to her family and following her own desires. I fear it's because of those things I said that the Henry family had that falling out the other day. And I fear... I shook my head, worried I'd already said too much. "Go on. Let's just get all this out in the open," Buster insisted. "Well, I fear that this is all going to lead to a much worse outcome for the girl. I'm afraid she's caught feelings for me and thinks that there's something there between us. I'm not sure what to do about it." "And what about you?" he asked. What do you mean? What about me? You have those same feelings toward the girl, Tom. I tensed, realizing I'd shared far more than I should have, and now panicked I'd have no way to take myself away from Buster's attention. Look, I'd answer that if it mattered. You know as well as I do that it doesn't. I'm a ranch hand with barely $1 to my name. I keep cash rolled up in a sock. I don't even have an account with the bank. That girl's a Henry. Her father's Robert Henry, owner of one of the biggest silver mines in the country. He's a household name across most of the country. Besides, if she ever did manage to get her father to leave her alone, she wants to be a teacher. You can't get mixed up with a man if you're looking to be a teacher. You overcomplicate things, Tom. I didn't need you to tell me her family history. I know who the girl is and who she's related to. Prefer if you just answer the question I asked. I couldn't. The truth of it frustrated me. The answer frustrated me, and what was the point of lying? It doesn't matter, Buster. What's got you so scared of this situation? This is a grown woman we're talking about. She can make whatever decisions she wants, and it's not your fault. Being a slave taught me a lot about the world, if you wouldn't mind an older man imparting a bit of wisdom. I'll listen to what you have to say, I said, even though I didn't want to. Life's a lot less complicated than we like to believe. We spend all this time worrying about what'll happen because of something we'll do that we forget to do anything. Make a decision and commit to it. You like the girl? Well, tell her and see what comes of it. Think she'll be better off without you? Maybe that's the truth. Make that decision and commit to it. Cut her off and let her know there's not going to be anything between the two of you. I'm not telling you what decision to make, but I'll tell you that Mr. Henry ain't going to be happy if a man flattens his finger with a hammer because Tom Rowland's daydreaming about his niece. Fine, Buster. It's not like you're wrong. I'll give it some thought. Sorry for letting my head float in the clouds. Buster placed his giant hand on my shoulder. Tom, we like to poke fun at your expense, but Mr. Henry thinks very highly of you, as do I. And you're good at talking to people, which is why Mr. Henry always sends you if someone needs talking to. Sometimes a person who thinks they have nothing has more than they realize, and the people you think have everything are missing everything that matters. Worry more about yourself, and don't assume so much about other people. I appreciate all that. Don't worry, I'll figure it all out. Although I worried that might be the biggest lie of all.
If you're enjoying our audio content, please like and subscribe. It's the best way to help out the channel.